Hello everyone, welcome to the variables assignment lecture. So what are variables? So we already saw how to work with numbers. It would be really nice if we can actually assign these data types a variable name to easily reference them later in our code. For example, if we have a variable name of my dogs equals to 2, it would be really nice to reference that number 2 by using that variable name my dogs. So in a nutshell, you have a sense of what variables are. Variables are just used to store data temporarily in the memory, and they are basic rules for naming a variable. For example, a variable name cannot start with a number. So you can see the previous example here that we have, my underscore dogs. You cannot start a variable name with a number. That's what we're trying to say in a nutshell right here. So there can be no space in the name. You have to use underscore instead, like what we saw in this example also. We can't leave a space when we are trying to name a variable. We have to use underscore instead of that space. And you can't use any of this symbol. So you can't use any of these special characters. The only special character that is allowed is underscore, right? So you can't use colon, you can't use semicolon, you can't use angular brackets, you can't use the division, you can't use the question mark, and so on and so forth, right? So you can't use this symbol while naming your variable. It's considered best practice, something known as PEP 8, that variable names are lowercase throughout. And in case you have a variable name that is more than 2 words, you can use underscore to separate them. All right. Some people also prefer using the camel naming convention or the snake naming convention, which is to use the underscore, but it's better to use lowercase throughout. Avoid using words that have special meaning in Python. And we're going to talk about keywords when we get to that aspect in Python also. But you need to make sure that your variable name does not match with a particular keyword that has been defined already in Python, right? So keywords are those words that are predefined in Python that has their meaning already. So like list, string, we can't use that name again for our variable. And you have to also take note of that. When you are using a small letter DOG and a capital letter DOG, they are both different. They are not the same variable name. So that's why it's considered best practice to use lowercase throughout. So Python uses dynamic typing. That's one thing you should also take note of. And what it means is you can actually reassign variables to a different data type. So for example, if you have like number is equals to 1, you can basically redefine that number to be equals to 3, or let me say a string, right, which can be dog, which can be cat. A variable name that was assigned a data type of a number before can be changed to a string. That's what it just means by dynamic typing, right? Basically, what it does is it makes Python very flexible in assigning data types. This is different in other programming languages like C, Java, and so on and so forth, where you really have to specify the type of variable that you're trying to define. They are also known as static typing, right? They are static typed programming languages. But Python is very flexible and you can reassign variables. So you need to be also careful when you're doing that. So in this example, we have my dogs equals to 2, which is correct. Um, this variable name is correct because you can see there's no space, no number, no special character, only the underscore that is allowed, and there's not is not a keyword in Python, right? You can also have my dogs equals to Sammy and Frankie. This is actually a list in Python, and we're going to talk more about list in Python also. And this is actually okay when you are naming your variable. So this variable name is correct. In other programming languages, if you try to do my dog equals to 2 and you try to reassign the value of my dog equals to Sammy and Frankie, it's going to give you error. Why? Because Python is a dynamic type language, while some other programming languages are not dynamic type. So that's one thing to take note of. For example, if you have int underscore my dog equals to 1 and my dog equals to Sammy, it's going to result in error, right? If you have worked with C or if you have worked with Java, you should know what int means and all of that, right? So they don't really allow you to reassign a variable that was initialized and as an integer to a string again. If you are trying to reassign the variable, it must be in numbers. And this is an example of a static typing in C++, all right? It also works in C and Java. So what are the pros and cons of dynamic typing? So when you are doing dynamic typing, which Python basically use, it's very easy to work with, right? It's very fast for deployment time. And the cons is it may result in bugs for unexpected data types, where in some case you might forget that, oh, you wanted to make it an integer and you tend to reassign it to a string. It's also very common when you're trying to prompt the user for an input. So that's something you should also watch out for. And I'm going to tell you about something that is called type. And what this does is it allows you to check the type of variable that you basically assigned. So now that we have that in place, let's go ahead to explore this concept. All right, guys, so I'm just going to go ahead to create a new file, right? And for this file, I'm going to save it as the default kernel. And in our upcoming lectures, you'll basically not see me doing this again. I'm going to just have the notebook opened, but I just wanted to walk you through how I'm opening the notebook, right? So I'm going to name this O2 dash, I'm going to name this variable assignment, right? I'm going to click rename. All right, so now let's go ahead to explore some of these variable concepts that I explained in our previous note. So variable assignment, escape M, shift enter to make it a markdown. All right. So now let's go ahead to assign a variable. I'm going to name this my underscore dogs. And this for example purpose, you can name your variable any name you like as far as you are following the rules for naming variable. I'm going to say my dog equals to 2. And for me to print out my dog, I can just say my underscore dogs, dogs, and I'm going to get my output, which is what 2. All right. So if I go ahead to say, okay, let me reassign this variable to something else. So let me say I want to say my underscore dogs equals to, and I'm going to put my dog's name right here. I'm going to say Zeus, right? I have a dog named Zeus. I'm also going to put my second dog name, which is named Jojo, right? A very cute dog of mine. So yeah, if I go ahead to run this cell, and you can see that I'm using the same variable name that I used for this value 2 here, and I'm not getting any error. So if I go ahead to print out my underscore dogs, you can see that we're going to have what Zeus and Jojo. We're no more having 2. So basically what we just did right here is we just reassigned the variable name that we initialized before to something else. We spoke about the pros and cons, right? First thing is it's very easy to work with. It's faster for deployment time. But the cons that you have to take note of is it may result in an unexpected bug that you might be trying to figure out and might not know where the error is coming from. And also you need to be aware of the type, which I'm going to explain very, very soon. All right. So now let's look at how we can assign variable names, right? Don't forget, if you want to access this notebook, you can check out the link in the description box. It's going to take you to the repo where all the codes there are available in. All right. So right here, I'm going to say A is equals to 5, right? And what I'm doing right here is I'm just basically saying that put the value of 5 into the variable name A. So what this does is whenever I want to access my value, which is 5, I can go ahead to call that A and it's going to get printed out, right? So if I run this and yeah, I'm going to say A, you can see A is going to give me what? 5. Very good. All right. So now we can also reassign it to another value, right? I can say my A is equals to 10. Right? If I run this cell and I say A right here again, you can see my A is now going to be 10. Now my A has changed from what? From 5 to 10, right? So what we just did is we just reassigned the variable. So we can also do additions. We can say A plus A, right? And if you run this cell, you can see we're going to have what? 20. So you can basically do the previous arithmetic operations that we did before in our numbers lecture. You can also do the same thing right here. All right. So now let's talk about more operators that we have in Python. So for example, I can say A plus equals to 10. And if I run this cell, before I run it first, let me tell you what this does, right? So briefly, let me tell you about comment also, right? So there's something that's called comment in Python, and you start a comment with hash, right? So what this does is it basically allows you to explain or to write something in that code cell, but it's not going to get executed, right? So I'm going to talk more about comments in our upcoming lectures also. But just know that comments means it helps in reading or basically understanding the code more better. So in case you want to explain what that line is doing, you can just write a comment, just like having a short notebook in your cell itself. So what this does is it's the same thing as A equals towards A plus 10. And don't forget our A was what before? Our A was 10, right? The value of A was 10. And now we are saying add 10 to it, right? So if I run the cell, right? If I run the cell, I'm going to come here and I'm going to say A. If I try to print out A right now, you're going to see we're going to have what? 20. Very good, right? So what this does is the plus equals to means A is equals to A plus the value you're trying to put, all right? So I can also say A plus equals to what? 2, right? And if I run this cell and I try to check my A again, you're going to see we're going to have what? 32, right? Because our A was 30 and it's saying A is equals to 30 plus 2, and put out our value and we have 32, all right? So one interesting thing I also want to tell you about variables is you can actually check the type of variable that you are actually using, right? So for example, if you want to know the type of this variable right here, you can just do type and you do into parentheses, right? And you put the variable name that you want to check the type of, right? So once you run this cell, before you run it, let me just tell you something about Python. You can actually go ahead to that function that you have. So currently what this function does is it returns the type of the variable that you pass into it, right? So if you click on Shift tab is going to give you more information about what a particular function or what a particular method does, right? So you can see what it does is it takes in name, base, dictionary, and all of that. And basically what it does is it returns the type of that variable that you have there. So if I go ahead to run the cell, you can see that now we now have integer, which is correct because we know that our A is what? 32, and 32 is a whole number, which is an integer in Python. So for example, if I have another variable, like let me say by say A is equals to, I'm going to create a tuple right here. So we'll talk more about tuples in our upcoming lecture, right? So but this is how you create a tuple in Python. And if I say type of A, you can see we're going to have what? Tuples, which is very, very important. So also if I try to create another variable name, I'm going to name this name, and I'm just going to say this name is equals to Daveworld. So if I go ahead to run this cell and I check type of what? Name, can you guess what it's going to be? Yes, you are right. It's going to be a string. So it's going to return str, a string. So basically, this is how you can basically check the type of data that you have in Python. There are lots more data types that we're going to explore and talk more about. We have dictionaries, we have lists, and so on and so forth. All right, so let's go ahead to do a very brief exercise. And what we're going to be doing right here is I just want to show you how variables work in more action. So let's say we were told to calculate your tax that are going to be deducted from if you are given a particular salary. We can actually do that simple calculation using variables, right? So we assign the variables some values of our salary, income, of the tax rate, and we can go ahead to do some basic arithmetic operations, right? So let's do that quickly. So let's say we have salary, right? So let's say our salary is equals to $100, right, per hour, and the tax they're going to be removing, right? So I'm going to say the tax rate, right, to be equals to, let's say, 0.1, right? What this means basically, 0.1 is just what? 10%. You should all know that, right? So we can go ahead to calculate our tax that we're going to be deducted from, which is going to be, I'm going to name the variable my underscore tax. And you can see what I'm doing here, right? I'm not using space because if I use space, it's going to result in an error. So I have to use underscore to separate those names. So I'm going to say calculate the tax. My tax is going to be what? Salary, right? Salary times the what? Tax rate. And something that is special about Python, about Jupyter Notebook, is you can click tab and it's going to show you the list of options to autocomplete from. So if I do that and I run this cell and I check what? My underscore tax, right? Tab to autocomplete, right? If I run this cell, you can see we're having what? 10.0, right? So basically, this is how variables work in a nutshell. And as we move on with the lecture, we're going to do more detailed examples about variables, assignments, about numbers, and so on and so forth. So in our upcoming lecture, we're going to be talking more about strings in Python, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye bye.